The spring afternoon hung heavy over the shattered streets of Cologne. It was March 6, 1945, just before 3:30 in the afternoon, and the cathedral square had become a place of reckoning. Obergefreiter Karl Hoffmann pressed his eye against the tank's periscope, watching the rubble-strewn approaches through cracked optics. The glass had fractured into a web of hairline breaks, but he could still see well enough. For 3 long years, he'd studied every American tank that rolled across European battlefields. The Sherman with its high-slung profile and its stubby 75mm gun. The lighter Stuarts that Tiger crews dismissed as toys. Even the rare jumbo variants, their extra armor plating no match for a Tiger's frontal plate beyond 500 meters. But something was emerging from the wreckage now, something that didn't fit any silhouette in his training materials. Hoffmann's voice came through the intercom system, and his crew heard something they'd never detected before: uncertainty, a tremor that betrayed his confusion. "That's not a Sherman," he said quietly. The gun barrel visible through his periscope was massive, longer and thicker than anything he'd seen, mounted on an American tank. The hull sat lower to the ground than a Sherman's, the armor sloped in a way that suggested casting rather than welding. The turret appeared enormous, almost oversized relative to the chassis, as if someone had mounted a cannon meant for anti-aircraft defense onto a tank body. Hoffmann's mind raced through recognition charts and intelligence briefings. Nothing matched. In the next 18 seconds, Karl Hoffmann and his 5-man crew would become among the first German tankers in history to discover that America had finally built a machine that could kill them at any range, from any angle. Just 3 minutes earlier, Wilhelm Bartelboth's Panther had taught the same lesson. The 5-man crew never reported what destroyed them. The M26 Pershing's 90mm gun had spoken first and last. The armor-piercing round traveled at 853 meters per second, covering the 120 meters between the two tanks in less time than Hoffmann could blink. It struck the Panther's frontal armor directly at the turret face. The 100mm plate that had deflected dozens of Sherman rounds across France and Belgium split open under the impact. The tungsten-tipped projectile continued through the crew compartment, still carrying tremendous energy before finally detonating. In that moment, the mathematics of Allied victory were being written not in operations orders, but in production statistics, and the grim testimony of tanks torn apart by weapons they couldn't withstand. The mythology of German tank invincibility had been built in steel and blood since 1942, when Tigers first appeared at Leningrad. For 2.5 years, crews had operated inside machines that seemed to rewrite the rules of armored warfare itself. Their 88mm guns could destroy any Allied tank at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. Their armor, 100mm thick on the front hull, 120mm on the turret, made them nearly immune to standard Allied tank guns at normal combat distances. The psychological effect proved as powerful as the mechanical advantage. Tank crews from heavy panzer companies described the sensation of near invincibility that came with commanding Tigers. The mathematics were indeed compelling. An American Sherman's 75mm gun could only penetrate a Tiger's frontal armor at ranges under 100 meters, and only then with special ammunition and favorable angles. Meanwhile, a Tiger's 88mm gun could punch through a Sherman's front at 2,000 meters. By December 1944, German tank commanders had developed standard tactics that exploited this technological superiority. They would position their Tigers and King Tigers at maximum range, using superior optics and firepower to destroy Allied tanks before they could close to effective distances. A single Tiger could, and frequently did, hold up entire American advances. The most celebrated example came at Villedieu-le-Bayou in June 1944, when SS Obersturmführer Michael Wittmann's Tiger destroyed 14 tanks, 2 anti-tank guns, and 13 additional vehicles in less than 15 minutes. Though Wittmann himself would fall in August, months before the Pershing arrived. This technological advantage created a psychological effect that extended far beyond individual battles. American tank crews developed what they called Tiger fever, often misidentifying any German tank as a Tiger and reporting far more Tiger encounters than actually occurred. Meanwhile, German crews painted victory marks on their gun barrels like fighter pilots, developing an almost mystical faith in their invulnerability. But 8,000 kilometers away, in Detroit, American engineers had been quietly working since September 1942 on a project designated T-26. They were building something that would shatter the myth of German tank dominance forever. American tank design had fallen dangerously behind by the time Shermans faced Tigers in Italy and Normandy. The Sherman itself, designed in 1941, when German armor meant a Panzer IV with a short-barreled gun, was outclassed in every meaningful category: firepower, armor, effective range. The Pershing development program represented a crash effort involving 14 major contractors, 300 subcontractors, and more than 50,000 workers spread across 22 states. Fisher Body Division of General Motors, which had been producing Shermans at its sprawling arsenal in Michigan, received orders to completely retool for the new heavy tank. The changes were staggering: new casting techniques for the turret, entirely different transmission systems. Most critically, integration of the 90mm gun, previously used only in tank destroyers and anti-aircraft roles. This gun was an engineering marvel. Developed from a successful anti-aircraft design, it fired a 24-pound armor-piercing round at velocities exceeding 2,800 feet per second. The standard M82 round could penetrate 119 millimeters of armor at 500 yards, enough to punch through a Tiger's frontal armor at combat ranges. The newer tungsten core rounds could penetrate over 220 millimeters at the same distance, threatening even the mighty King Tiger. The development remained shrouded in unprecedented secrecy. Workers at Fisher were told they were building an improved Sherman variant. Components were manufactured in separate facilities to prevent anyone from grasping the complete design. When the first 20 Pershings shipped to Europe in January 1945, they were listed as heavy maintenance equipment and covered with tarps. On January 15th, under darkness and heavy security, the first batch of M26 Pershings was loaded onto ships bound for Europe. Each tank wrapped in waterproof covers, each labeled with false shipping codes. The crews selected to operate them had trained in isolation at Fort Knox since November, sworn to secrecy under penalty of court-martial. The crossing took 11 days through waters still patrolled by German U-boats. The Pershings were positioned deep in the ship's holds, hidden behind rows of regular Shermans, concealed even from most of the ship's crew. The tank crews spent the voyage studying German tank recognition materials and memorizing their cover story. They were replacement crewmen for standard Sherman units, nothing more. The Pershings arrived at Antwerp on January 26th, again under cover of darkness. Special trains transported them immediately to the 3rd Armored Division's maintenance area near Duren. Here the crews made final preparations, while Division Commander Major General Maurice Rose personally briefed armor commanders on the new weapons' capabilities. By February 25th, the first 4 Pershings were assigned to the 3rd Armored Division's push toward the Rhine. They were distributed one per task force, scattered among regular Sherman companies with strict orders to avoid combat and stay clear of German heavy armor. Crews painted them with standard olive drab and added unit markings to help them blend in, though their longer guns and lower profiles made them distinctive to trained eyes. The German intelligence failure was absolute. Despite maintaining one of the war's most effective intelligence services, German High Command had no idea the Pershings existed. German commanders believed America had chosen quantity over quality as permanent doctrine, unable to conceive that American industry could simultaneously produce heavy tanks while maintaining Sherman output. Near Elsdorf on February 26th, the first Pershing saw combat. The T-26E3, nicknamed Fireball, was knocked out by a Tiger in a close-range ambush. An 88mm round struck the Pershing's gun mantlet, killing the gunner and loader. But the Pershing was repaired and returned to action on March 7th, demonstrating American maintenance and recovery capabilities. Over the following week, scattered reports reached German headquarters about encounters with an unidentified American tank carrying a longer gun and thicker armor than standard Shermans. A Panther crew reported being destroyed at 1,800 meters by a single shot from an unknown American vehicle. Most disturbing to German commanders was the consistent detail in every report. A gun that appeared significantly longer and larger than the standard 75mm cannon. On March 6, 1945, the engagement at Cologne Cathedral would become the most thoroughly documented tank duel of World War II, captured on film by Army Signal Corps cameraman Jim Bates. German forces had positioned their remaining tanks around the cathedral square. Wilhelm Bartelboth, commanding a Panther from Panzer Brigade 106, felt confident despite the American approach. The open square gave clear fields of fire, and their positions behind rubble provided partial hull cover. At 15:20 hours, Bartelboth spotted movement near the destroyed hotel. Through his periscope, he saw what he initially reported as an unusual Sherman variant with an extended barrel. He ordered his gunner to engage at 300 meters, point-blank range for a Panther's powerful 75mm gun. The Panther fired first, its round striking the approaching tank's frontal armor, but instead of penetrating, the shot ricocheted upward in a burst of sparks. Bartelboth had exactly 3 seconds to comprehend this impossibility before the return shot arrived. Staff Sergeant Robert Early, commanding the Pershing nicknamed Eagle 7, had already acquired the Panther in his gun sight. His gunner, Corporal Clarence Smoyer, centered the crosshairs on the Panther's mantlet and fired. The 90mm round punched through the turret face. The tank erupted into flames as ammunition cooked off. The film footage captured by Jim Bates documented what followed. Another German tank nearby, accounts varied whether it was a Tiger or second Panther, attempted to engage but was also destroyed by the Pershing with a single frontal shot. The engagement lasted less than 5 minutes, but it demonstrated conclusively that American tanks could now match German armor in firepower and exceed it in capability. The destruction at Cologne Cathedral triggered an intelligence crisis at German high command. Oberkommando West issued urgent directives demanding all units report immediately any encounters with new American heavy tanks, providing detailed descriptions and capability assessments. The responses painted a picture of technological surprise that German commanders struggled to accept. Multiple crews reported American tanks with 90mm class guns and heavy frontal armor, destroying Panthers and Tigers at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters. German crews began referring to it as the long gun Sherman, unable to conceive of an entirely new American heavy tank. This misunderstanding persisted for weeks, contributing to tactical errors as crews attempted to engage Pershings using anti-Sherman tactics. The Panzerwaffe's training infrastructure struggled to respond. Tank schools had no information about the new American vehicle. Recognition charts didn't exist. Tactical manuals assumed American tank guns couldn't penetrate German heavy armor frontally. By mid-March 1945, roughly 20 Pershings were operational in the European theater, with more arriving weekly. While this number seems insignificant compared to the thousands of Shermans in service, the psychological impact far exceeded the mathematical ratio. German tank crews accustomed to engaging Shermans with impunity now approached every engagement with uncertainty and dread. The kill ratios told part of the story. In limited engagements where Pershings faced German armor, they achieved positive results, though the small sample size made statistical analysis difficult. What mattered most was the uncertainty. The myth of invincibility had cracked. From a distance, German crews couldn't tell the difference between a Pershing and a Sherman, and that uncertainty haunted every battle. But production figures told an even more troubling story. While Germany struggled to churn out roughly 100 tanks each month by early 1945, American factories had built 2,200 M26 tanks by the time the war ended. Fisher Body's Grand Blanc arsenal alone had completed 1,839 of those machines. When German crews learned these numbers through interrogations or discovered documents, the realization hit hard. They weren't just facing a technically skilled opponent. They were up against an industrial machine that could replace losses faster than Germany could ever manage, even at its peak output. When German forces captured damaged Pershing components and examined knocked-out vehicles, their engineers and tank crews got their first real look at American heavy tank engineering. What they found shattered their expectations. The cast turret was forged as one solid piece, demanding manufacturing techniques Germany had never perfected for components of this size. The engine, a Ford V8 producing 500 horsepower, delivered reliability that German engines simply couldn't match. The transmission packed advanced features so sophisticated they seemed almost impossible, yet it ran smoothly. German technical officers quickly understood this wasn't just an upgraded Sherman. It was something altogether different. Every single component reflected cutting-edge engineering. The gun stabilization system kept the turret on target even while the tank rolled forward, a capability German Tigers couldn't achieve. The power traverse could swing that turret a full 360 degrees in just 15 seconds. The optical systems matched anything Germany possessed. What really shook German crew morale was what they discovered inside. The Pershing's interior was spacious compared to cramped German designs, with ergonomics that made long operations less exhausting. The ammunition storage featured wet storage systems that prevented fires, something German tanks desperately wanted but never had. Even minor details mattered. Padded surfaces, interior lighting, creature comforts throughout the hull showed a philosophy of crew welfare that German designers had abandoned in favor of armor thickness. News of these American capabilities rippled through the German ranks rapidly, hitting morale that was already fractured by endless retreats and growing shortages. German tactical doctrine had rested on one fundamental belief: technical superiority could offset numerical weakness. Defensive positions were selected because Tigers and Panthers could engage American armor from distances where return fire was ineffective. Offensive operations assumed German heavy tanks could punch through American lines with manageable losses. Both assumptions crumbled overnight. The psychological blow was visible in a grim new pattern. Crews reported mechanical breakdowns that had never been breakdowns at all. Tanks declared irreparable sat abandoned with loose tracks, empty fuel tanks, and minor tread damage, issues that crews would have routinely fixed just weeks earlier. As American forces pushed toward the Rhine in late March 1945, German tank crews faced a nightmare scenario. They held bridgeheads against American advances, but uncertainty consumed them. Were those approaching vehicles Shermans or Pershings? The question haunted every commander. This pattern repeated across the entire front. German tanks that once stood their ground now retreated at first contact. Defensive positions that should have held for days collapsed within hours. Though only 20 Pershings actually saw combat among thousands of American tanks, the psychological impact was paralyzed. April 1945 brought complete collapse of German armored resistance in the West. Tank units still fielding operational machines often refused engagement unless guaranteed no Pershings were present. Since no such guarantee existed, many units stopped offensive operations entirely. The battle for Dessau between April 23 and 24 showed how completely the dynamic had shifted. German defenders with operational Panthers and Tigers took purely defensive positions and avoided range engagements with American armor. The American attack, which included Pershings mixed among regular Shermans, faced minimal organized resistance as German crews chose withdrawal over potential confrontation with superior American tanks. Tank aces with dozens of confirmed kills abandoned their vehicles rather than face possible Pershings. Mere rumors of Pershings in a sector triggered German unit withdrawals. The Panzerwaffe that had conquered France and nearly defeated the Soviet Union had lost its will to continue. As German defenses collapsed in late April and early May 1945, thousands of German tank crews became prisoners. U.S. Army intelligence officers conducted interrogations that revealed how profoundly American heavy tank capability had affected German psychology. Veterans consistently described learning about American heavy tanks as a breaking point that changed everything. For 3 years, they had operated believing in German technical superiority. Even badly outnumbered, even retreating steadily, they trusted their Tigers were better. When they learned Americans had equal or superior tanks, the war became psychologically hopeless. The interrogations uncovered something remarkable. Many German crews had never actually engaged a Pershing in combat, yet fear of them shaped every tactical decision. The uncertainty itself proved as devastating as actual combat encounters. What German tank crews failed to understand until after the war was the massive scale of American heavy tank production. Only 310 Pershings had reached Europe before Germany's surrender, with roughly 20 seeing actual combat. Yet American factories had built over 2,200 M26 tanks by October 1945. Fisher Body's Grand Blanc arsenal alone produced 1,739, while Detroit Tank Arsenal and Chrysler added 473 more. The assembly lines could complete a Pershing in hours once converted, compared to weeks needed for German Tiger production. Germany had built just 1,347 Tiger IS and 492 King Tigers across the entire war. The production infrastructure told its own story completely. American tank manufacturing dwarfed Germany's capacity by an enormous margin. The flexibility to shift from Sherman to Pershing production while sustaining output demonstrated industrial adaptability Germany never possessed. Hardened veterans, not panicked recruits, consistently identified learning about American heavy tanks as a pivotal psychological turning point. These were experienced crews who understood tank warfare deeply. They described a clear before and after in their combat psychology. Before learning about American heavy tanks, they believed in ultimate German victory through superior technology. Afterward, they fought only for survival, constantly seeking ways to avoid engagement. Their response to American heavy tanks differed markedly from their reactions to other Allied advantages. Against numerical superiority, they adapted tactics. Facing air dominance, they moved at night and used concealment. But technological parity in tank design, their one counted-on advantage since 1942, offered no tactical response. Nothing symbolized German psychological collapse more vividly than the King Tiger cruise in the war's final weeks. The King Tiger represented German tank design at its absolute peak. 68 tons of armor and firepower that had seemed essentially invulnerable to frontal attack throughout its service. Yet by April 1945, King Tiger crews increasingly hesitated to engage American armor. The tank's 150mm frontal armor and long-barreled 80mm gun should have maintained technical superiority over the Pershing. But knowing Americans possessed heavy tanks with powerful 90mm guns created psychological paralysis. Crews once confident in engagement now hesitated, unsure whether approaching vehicles were Shermans they could destroy or Pershings that could threaten them. Post-war analysis revealed the staggering scope of German intelligence failure regarding the Pershing program. Despite extensive spy networks and signals intelligence capabilities, the Wehrmacht received no warning of American heavy tank development until Pershings appeared in combat. The failure went deeper than missing one weapons program. German intelligence had fundamentally misunderstood American industrial capacity. They knew Americans produced vast quantities of tanks, but assumed mass production meant accepting inferior quality. They couldn't imagine American industry could pivot to manufacturing heavy tanks while maintaining mass production advantages simultaneously. Units possessing operational tanks frequently refused engagement with American armor, regardless of actual vehicle types present. Tank commanders reported escalating desperate efforts to avoid American armor. Vehicles were declared mechanical losses after breakdowns requiring only field repairs. Crews reported encountering enemy heavy tanks in sectors where reconnaissance later confirmed only Shermans operated. Ironically, the Pershing's psychological impact far exceeded its actual combat effectiveness. While superior in many aspects, the Pershing had significant problems. The transmission proved unreliable, causing mechanical failures. The gun, though powerful, fired more slowly than German 88mm weapons. The armor, though well sloped, was actually thinner than King Tiger protection. Purely technically, the Pershing roughly matched a Panther, superior in some respects, inferior in others. It wasn't the supertank German crews imagined. But psychological impact depends on belief, not technical reality. Given that only about 20 Pershings saw actual combat, statistical analysis becomes problematic. The tiny sample size makes specific kill ratio claims meaningless. What truly mattered wasn't statistical superiority, but psychological impact itself. German crews believed Americans had achieved tank parity or superiority, and this belief shaped their actions more profoundly than actual tank capabilities did. Pershings accelerated German surrenders in the war's final weeks. Tank crews who might have continued fighting with Tigers and Panthers against Shermans chose surrender when facing possible Pershings. The psychological calculation was stark. Fighting Shermans with superior German tanks offered survival chances. Fighting potentially equal American tanks offered only death. This pattern repeated relentlessly across the entire front. Tank crews, once among the war's most determined fighters, became increasingly willing to surrender. U.S. Army intelligence noted that by late April, German tank crew prisoners arrived at collection points before infantry from identical units. A complete reversal of earlier patterns where tank crews fought until the very end. Remarkably, German tank units transferred from the Eastern Front, where they still dominated Soviet tanks, experienced severe psychological shock upon learning about American heavy tanks. These units arrived confident in their technological superiority, only discovering that advantage might evaporate against American forces. Heavy Panzer Battalion 100, transferred from the Eastern Front in March 1945, had destroyed hundreds of Soviet tanks, including the newest T-34-85s and IS-2s. The crews considered themselves invincible. Within just weeks of arriving on the Western Front, these German units found their effectiveness crumbling. Reports kept arriving about encounters with American heavy tanks, and each one chipped away at their confidence. The soldiers who had dominated Soviet armor across Eastern Europe now faced something fundamentally different. They couldn't make sense of it. How could they still be winning against Soviet tanks while potentially facing equals in American machines? The realization struck hard. Americans might not just have caught up to Soviet tank development, they might have surpassed it. And they were doing this while maintaining production numbers Germany could only dream about. It felt like facing an unstoppable force. As German crews absorbed combat reports and intelligence briefings, technical details about American heavy tanks spread through the panzer divisions. Each new piece of information damaged morale further. The stabilized gun system impressed them. The advanced transmission surprised them. The crew comfort features puzzled them. Everything pointed to the same uncomfortable truth. American engineering hadn't just caught up to German design. It had potentially moved ahead. When crews learned that American tanks carried infantry telephones mounted on the rear hull, allowing soldiers on the ground to communicate directly with tank crews, they recognized something Germans had never prioritized. Americans understood combined arms operations in ways German designers hadn't bothered to develop. The wet ammunition storage system showed another stark difference. Americans had designed their tanks to protect crew members from catastrophic explosions. German tanks hadn't. This deliberate choice to prioritize crew survival over other considerations revealed how differently Americans thought about warfare. Every new technical detail reinforced the same growing recognition. Americans hadn't matched German tank design. They had apparently improved upon it. They had considered aspects German engineers had overlooked or dismissed. For crews who had spent years hearing that German engineering represented something inherently superior, this moment created psychological devastation. The final weeks of April 1945 brought the last battles between German heavy tanks and American forces. These engagements showed something the German tankers had never expected: the complete reversal of who held the advantage. Tiger crews who had once hunted Sherman tanks with near-complete confidence now fought with desperation and uncertainty. Their training had taught them to engage the most dangerous threats first, but now they couldn't even identify what they were facing. Were those approaching tanks Shermans or Pershings? The uncertainty paralyzed decisions. Crews hesitated, lost precious seconds, missed opportunities for that crucial first shot. This hesitation often cost them their lives, regardless of whether they were actually facing Shermans or Pershings. Military historians studying the war afterward recognized something important. The Pershing's impact on German armored forces went far beyond the numbers. Only a limited number of Pershings actually saw combat, which made statistical analysis nearly impossible. But the effect on German morale was undeniable and well documented. The evidence supported this conclusion. During the 2 months before Pershing started appearing in combat, German tank units in the West maintained surprisingly high operational readiness despite terrible material shortages. Once reports of Pershing sightings began spreading, readiness declined dramatically. Many losses came from tank abandonment rather than actual combat damage. German tank crews had built their entire confidence structure around one belief: German technology was superior. This conviction had sustained them through horrific losses and constant retreat. The Pershing's appearance shattered that entire belief system. Without it, German tankers lost something crucial. They lost the psychological foundation that made continued resistance feel meaningful. Decades after the war ended, German tank veterans consistently pointed to the same moment. Learning about American heavy tanks. That was when they knew, really knew, the war was over, they would lose. At veterans' reunions and in memoirs, the theme repeated constantly. Their last hope had been technological superiority. The Pershing destroyed that hope. Veterans described what it felt like discovering that American workers in Detroit, in an industrial democracy they had been taught to despise, had built tanks matching German Tigers. Workers in factories, probably sitting in comfortable chairs, deciding what to have for lunch, somehow building machines equal to anything German totalitarianism and ruthless efficiency could produce. That realization proved more demoralizing than any actual military defeat. What haunted German crews even more was knowledge they didn't have during the war. The Pershing was just the beginning. The Americans had barely started their heavy tank development. The T-26E4 Super Pershing, with its upgraded 90mm gun, went into limited production, only 25 units. One reached combat in Europe. The T-26E5 with thicker armor, up to 279mm thickness, existed as 27 prototypes. Beyond those designs, the T-29 heavy tank with a 105mm gun was in advanced prototype phase. The T-30 with a massive 155mm gun was in development. American tank design wasn't just catching up. It was accelerating past German capabilities while maintaining production advantages Germany simply did not possess. The production numbers told the real story. By April 1945, American tank manufacturing facilities covered more than 50 million square feet of factory floor. The Detroit tank arsenal alone exceeded most of German tank production infrastructure. Fisher Body had retooled entire automobile plants for tank production in just months. German industry couldn't accomplish that kind of rapid conversion. Beyond tactical and technical concerns, the Pershing created something deeper for German tank crews: a moral crisis. They had been told they were fighting for German technological superiority. They had been told they represented racial superiority. The appearance of superior American tanks, built by workers' Nazi propaganda dismissed as inferior races, challenged everything. It challenged the ideological foundation of their entire struggle. This hit especially hard for Waffen-SS tank crews. These men had been selected specifically for ideological reliability. They had accepted Nazi racial theories as justification for their actions. They had built their identities around these beliefs. The Pershing's existence forced them to confront an impossible question. If Americans could build superior tanks, what did that say about the racial superiority theories they had accepted? The final accounting reveals a complex story. In total, 310 Pershings reached Europe before Germany's surrender. Only about 20 actually saw combat. This limited deployment made any kill ratio claims statistically meaningless. What mattered wasn't German tanks destroyed. What mattered was how the Pershing's mere existence affected German morale and tactical thinking. German records showed dramatic increases in tank abandonments in sectors where Pershings were rumored to operate. Crew surrenders increased noticeably after Pershing deployment became known. Operational readiness in panzer units dropped significantly, though other factors contributed to this decline as well. The greatest irony emerged when looking backward at German tank development. Germany had actually produced designs that might have exceeded American tanks. The Panther 250 and E-75 programs represented genuinely advanced designs that might have maintained German technical superiority. But they existed only on blueprints or in prototypes when Pershings were entering mass production. This contrast embodied the fundamental difference between German and American approaches to warfare. Germans pursued technical perfection in individual weapons. Americans pursued sufficient quality in massive quantities. When Americans achieved technical parity with the Pershing while maintaining production superiority, German resistance became mathematically impossible. The psychological shock of discovering American heavy tank capability left lasting marks on German military thinking. After the war, German military doctrine emphasized that technological superiority alone could never again be assumed as a strategic advantage. The German military developed a profound respect for American industrial capacity that persists to this day. Many German veterans who emigrated to America after the war cited one factor in their decision: the industrial might they had witnessed. The Pershing symbolized that might. If America could produce such weapons while maintaining democratic freedoms and prosperity, perhaps the American system was worth embracing. Today, Pershings stand in museums around the world, silent testimony to American industrial achievement. At the Patton Museum at Fort Knox, a Pershing stands beside a captured King Tiger. The display notes note their rough technical equivalence, but that placard can't capture the psychological revolution the American tank created. German veterans visiting these displays often pause and reflect. They remember the shock of discovering American heavy tank capability. The Pershing represented something greater than a weapon. It symbolized American industrial capacity finally focused on matching German quality while maintaining quantitative superiority. The full impact becomes clear through the numbers. German tank crew morale declined notably after reports of American heavy tanks started circulating. Only 20 Pershings saw combat, making specific kill ratios statistically meaningless. Yet 310 Pershings reached Europe before Germany's surrender. By October 1945, Americans had produced 2,202 total M26 tanks. Germany built 1,347 Tiger VE tanks and 492 King Tiger tanks throughout the entire war. Fisher Body alone produced 1,739 Pershings. Chrysler added 473 more. These numbers revealed that the Pershing's psychological impact far exceeded its limited combat presence. Knowing that Americans could mass-produce heavy tanks while Germany struggled to maintain existing vehicles proved as demoralizing as actual combat losses. The last documented German tank versus Pershing engagement happened in late April 1945 as the war moved toward its conclusion. By then, the psychological damage was already complete. German tankers who had entered the war supremely confident in their technological superiority ended it discovering that American industrial democracy had matched their best efforts. The story provides timeless lessons about warfare, psychology, and industrial capacity. It demonstrates that technological superiority alone cannot sustain military effectiveness without the industrial foundation to support it. More fundamentally, it shows how psychological factors can outweigh material ones in warfare. The Pershing's psychological impact far exceeded its actual combat presence. 20 tanks contributed to breaking the once proud spirit of German tank forces. Not through overwhelming combat victories, not through superior tactics, but through shattering the myth of German technical invincibility. The psychological journey lasted just 8 weeks, from the first Pershing combat in late February to Germany's surrender in early May. From hunters to hunted. From superior to potentially inferior. The Pershing's true victory wasn't measured in destroyed German tanks. With only 20 in combat, statistical analysis was impossible. The true victory was in destroyed German certainty. Tank crews who had fought against overwhelming odds for years, sustained by faith in their technological edge, lost that faith when American heavy tanks appeared. In the end, the M26 Pershing accomplished what thousands of Shermans couldn't. It contributed to breaking German tankers' spirit, not through overwhelming numbers, not through superior tactics, but through the simple, devastating proof that American engineering had caught up. The long barrel that German crews saw through their gun sights in those final battles wasn't just a weapon, it was the end of an era. German tankers never knew the American Pershing carried a 90mm gun capable of killing their Tigers until those guns spoke in combat. When they did, the myth of German invincibility died. The hunters had become the hunted. They knew it. In that knowledge lay the psychological collapse that helped end the war in Europe. The Pershing stands as testimony to a fundamental truth of warfare. Technological superiority is temporary. Industrial capacity and democratic innovation endure. German tankers learned this lesson in the hardest possible way, staring down the barrel of an American 90mm gun that proved American democracy could produce weapons equal to anything German totalitarianism had created. Even if in limited numbers, that psychological impact far exceeded statistical significance. In that moment, an era ended.